He's charged with inciting a mob to try and overturn his defeat in 2020. Why is it that just 3 years later, Donald Trump may have already killed suspense in the race to the 2024 Republican nomination? We'll ask about the former president's record win in the Iowa caucuses, where he barely campaigned in person and stayed so far ahead of the rest of the field, he didn't even bother with candidates' debates. They say there's no such thing as bad publicity. The limelight seems to be serving Trump well in this election year, even if it's from the dock of his countless court cases. He's back in New York City for one this Tuesday. To his supporters, he's a victim of the system that's rigged. That's the narrative amplified by the likes of Fox News. But to win a general election, Trump will have to convince enough independent voters that they too are hard done by in this rematch of the nativists versus the globalists. Keenly aware, his rival Joe Biden, who's courted trade unions, pushed subsidies for homegrown industry, and incessantly pointed to his own working class roots. And yet, despite January 6th, the race is close, very close, with populists from France to South America inspired by the Trump method. Is it already a turning point for liberal democracies the world over? Today in the France 24 debate, how Trump has clobbered the competition in Iowa. With us, former France 24 White House correspondent Ketevan Gorgestani. And 4 years ago, you waited for days, you said?
Days to get that final result for the Democrats. It
was over in 30 minutes this time. She's researched grassroots activism in the United States. Agnès Trouillet is professor of U.S. civilization at Nanterre University. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Also at Nanterre, political scientist Elisa Schell. She writes about healthcare inequality and reproductive rights. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
From New York City, Ian Reifovitz, professor of history at Empire State University, the author of The Tribalization of Politics, How Rush Limbaugh's Race-Baiting Rhetoric on the Obama Presidency Paved the Way for Trump. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Your reactions on the hashtag F24debate. Yeah, the weather impacted the turnout, but not the outcome. The coldest Iowa caucuses on record had Donald Trump sweeping the board, garnering more than half the votes, more than twice as many delegates as his nearest rival, Ron DeSantis, and setting his sights on revenge against the sitting president.
So I don't want to be overly rough on the president, but I have to say that he is the worst president that we've had in the history of our country.
The message is a simple one, Ketevan Gorgestani.
Yes, Donald Trump is already looking at the general election. He's already facing Joe Biden, if you will. And he also talked about his nearest rivals, Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. He had some very nice words. He said they were having a great time. It sounded more like they had conceded the race already than that they were still in this nominating race. So you can clearly tell that Donald Trump is already looking ahead, and he's really focalized on Joe Biden because he knows, he sees that his nearest rivals aren't really up to the battle, it seems.
Ian Reifovitz, I know that there's still a week to go until New Hampshire. Is there, are we just entertaining the suspense to get more eyeballs in front of TV sets and newspapers, or is it over?
No, it's not over. I mean, I know we're going to focus mostly on the horse race, but so in that respect, Nikki Haley certainly has a chance, more than a 0% chance of winning in New Hampshire. In some ways, Ron DeSantis staying in the race for New Hampshire might help Nikki Haley, because it's my suspicion, not my suspicion, it looks like a majority of DeSantis voters would go to Trump over Haley. So if DeSantis were to have dropped out last night, that might have helped Trump numerically. Look, if Nikki Haley wins in New Hampshire, that still doesn't make her the favorite. Trump would remain the favorite, but at least she would have a fighting chance to get through South Carolina, and then there's the next day, and then there is the next day. And what matters here is that if Trump were to be convicted at a trial, now I don't know how quickly that we're going to see a result like that, all bets are off. That probably wouldn't happen soon enough to derail his push for the Republican nomination, but it would have a major impact on his general election viability or even his ability to remain the Republican nominee if he'd won enough primaries to clinch that nomination, but then got convicted. I mean, all bets are off at that point.
You really think that at that point that Republicans would tell him not to take the nomination?
Well, it's not about Republicans telling him not to. There are mechanisms. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but before he is nominated, there's a process by which the Republican National Committee could essentially block him from getting the nomination. Once he gets the nomination, there's a process by which he could be removed. They're not going to do that lightly. That is not something that they're just going to do because of some bad polling. But if he's convicted of a felony, you never know what they might do. There was a poll taken, Reuters Ipsos poll in December, where 31% of Republican respondents, not 31% of voters, 31% of Republican respondents said that they would not vote for Trump in a general election if he was convicted by a jury of a felony. That's a serious number, and I think Republicans would have to take that seriously at the highest levels if he were convicted after winning the nomination.
All right, well, let's turn to the historian on this one. Agnès Trouillet, the true believers in Donald Trump, they point to 1920 when a candidate for president ran from jail. He'd been accused of treason and won millions of votes. Do you see Donald Trump in any way, shape, or form bowing out?
I would say yes, because his bond to his voters, to his base, is so strong that they would support him anyway. And
so he would not quit?
He would not quit, no. He has so much, he has this wave carrying him through, and I don't think so.
All right, one of the questions is why the support. Are you surprised, Elisa Schell, after what happened 3 years ago on January the 6th, that Donald Trump is the favorite by such a wide margin on the Republican side?
Well, Donald Trump won Iowa, that for sure, but not by a landslide. He only won by 51% of the votes. Iowa
Widest margin ever, though, for a Republican caucus.
Yes, but Iowa is a white, evangelical, age, rural state. So that's his base. That he should have won by a much wider margin. So I don't think that's a huge victory for Donald Trump. I think it's the first warning that his strategy of chaos is not working. And in his victory speech, he said that he had to make America come together. That's the first time we saw it having such a discourse in this campaign. So I don't think it's a huge victory, and I don't think it's going to be an easy win for Donald Trump to be the Republican nominee.
Kerevan Gorjestani?
I think New Hampshire is going to be really key in this to see if there is any potential for Nikki Haley, because that's who we're looking at. The numbers in New Hampshire are really for Nikki Haley. You need to look at New Hampshire as a totally opposite sort of Republican base than we have in Iowa, for example. New Hampshire is a very independent-minded state. These are people where, first of all, the primary is open to independents, so they are going to be able to vote, and they really favor Haley. And Haley is not that far off Donald Trump in New Hampshire, and that was before Chris Christie dropped out earlier, and before Asa Hutchinson, who is also an anti-Trump candidate, bowed out. And those votes mostly are likely to be going to Nikki Haley. And so if she can go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump in New Hampshire, the narrative, I'm not saying that that means that he's going to lose, but the narrative is going to be, we have somebody that is potentially viable going forward, and it will be somebody that voters who don't want Donald Trump necessarily, Republican voters who are trying to see someone to give them hope that they could vote for someone else that could likely win. That would be key for her in New Hampshire. And then you have South Carolina. She's the former governor of South Carolina.
She's trailing in the polls.
She's trailing in the polls, but
in her home state.
If in New Hampshire she can do something really good, that could change the narrative going into South Carolina and give the option to South Carolinians, look, this is someone you know, this is someone who was your governor, she did well in New Hampshire, and maybe, of course, this is going to be an uphill battle, but I think New Hampshire is going to be really the tipping point because Iowa is such an outlier in the United States. Even the evangelical vote in Iowa is not the evangelical vote that you have in the South. In the South, they're much more religious than they are in Iowa, where the evangelical vote, there were plenty of articles written about it, that it's seen more as people self-describing as evangelicals as a cultural thing rather than a religious. And so that white rural evangelical vote is not the same as the one that you have in the South.
Yeah, we've seen, though, that, again, there is what happened on January the 6th, seen from from outside of the United States. It's a question of why Donald Trump is so popular when he tried to stop this certification process of Joe Biden's win in 2021. In the 8 years since the untested Trump blew away the Republican establishment in the 2016 race to the nomination, he found a brand, and one that energized citizens, many of whom don't usually vote. The formula, it seems it still stands, reports Monty Francis.
Except
Look, he's going crazy.
when Donald Trump appeared on Fox News recently, the host seemed keen to calm fears that the former president would not abuse his power if he's reelected. But instead, Trump doubled down.
You are promising America tonight you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one.
Except
Look,
for?
he's going crazy. Except for day one.
Meaning?
I want to close the border, and I want to drill.
That's not right.
At his rallies in recent weeks, Trump has praised authoritarian leaders such as Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping, and Vladimir Putin, calling them brilliant men. And he's used language echoing the Nazis, saying that immigrants were, quote, poisoning the blood of our country, comments he's repeated in the face of sharp criticism.
And it's true. They're destroying the blood of our country. That's what they're doing. They're destroying our country. They don't like it when I said that. And I never read Mein Kampf.
If reelected, the former president has pledged to take care of unfinished business from his first term, completing the wall along the U.S.-Mexico border, reinstating travel bans on some Muslim-majority countries, and withdrawing the U.S. from NATO. But he's also made a series of new promises, including ending birthright citizenship in the United States and canceling the visas of foreign students who've participated in what he's called anti-Israel protests. He's also talked about reviving a program used by President Eisenhower in the 1950s, known by the ethnic slur Operation Wetback, where it's estimated some 1 million Mexican migrants were rounded up and deported. A 1,000-page document drawn up by Trump allies at the conservative group the Heritage Foundation outlines plans to dismantle the so-called deep state and to enable Trump to fire tens of thousands of federal employees. It also aims to give Trump influence over the Federal Communications Commission, which regulates media in the U.S. Political observers say Trump is running an openly authoritarian campaign, vowing to use the justice system against his foes, including President Joe Biden, branding them human scum and vermin. Despite this, he remains wildly popular with his base, especially among white evangelical voters.
He was the most supportive of the Bible of any president in my lifetime. And I'm not saying we've had all bad presidents, but I'm saying that he was the one that stood out to me.
With the former president facing 91 criminal counts, his critics, including former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney, has said Trump would use the presidency to escape prosecution and would refuse to abide by court rulings.
The moment that a chief executive determines that he will not abide by the rulings of the courts, our system will unravel.
Cheney has even warned that if reelected, Trump would refuse to leave office after his 4-year term expired. Critics say a second Trump term would test the U.S. system of checks and balances like never before, leaving it up to Congress and the courts to stand in his way.
Agnès Trouillet, is Donald Trump an outlier, or is he reflective of a trend, a nativist trend that we also have here in Europe?
Well, that's the question everybody's asking. Is he genuine? Is he unveiling his real intentions, or is this just provocation? So I guess it's a little bit of the three of them. And
so you're saying he's doing this in part because he's a showman and he likes to grab the headlines?
You always want to remember where he comes from, and he's been using it with so much success over the years. And so this nativist rhetoric is of course dangerous, and but he plays on both sides, because he called the nation together and then he appealed to divisive points. So we don't really know. What I would be more concerned about than the nativist rhetoric is what he's doing with a network of nonprofit groups to prepare, the scaffolding if he's elected, by recruiting lawyers that will be put in key positions, lawyers that are ideologically supporting America first and who have the spine to defend his agenda. So they're preparing that right now, and the 2025 group is part of them. And so the rhetoric is dangerous, but what he's doing concretely is also very dangerous, and using the Justice Department to punish his enemies.
Because we had, for instance, in Italy, Giorgia Meloni becoming prime minister, hailing from a party whose roots were in Mussolini's fascism. But when she's in power, in a coalition, it's a little bit different, hasn't ruled to the far right in Italy. Would a second Donald Trump mandate be a far-right presidency?
Yeah, that's what we can expect, because it seems that the agenda and the people he's trying to recruit are more far-right. And, for example, the Federalist Society, whose president has advised him as to the judges, the justices to appointed to the Supreme Court, they find the Federalist Society is not conservative enough, or, well,
this is a sort of a libertarian club, the
yes,
Federalist Society.
They are. And so they're not enough in line with the movement, what is called the movement, the Trump movement now. So it could be more far-right than it is right now.
Again, it's the question I asked you earlier, Elisabeth, about how, despite what could be a potential radicalism, he's very, very popular.
Yes, I think Donald Trump is the product of the evolution of the Republican Party and of its electoral base. So since Reagan, the blue-collar share of the electorate is shrinking. So the strategy for Republicans is to galvanize his base and being more extreme to mobilize voters in order to win. And in that respect, populism or nativism is quite late in the US compared to what we've seen in Europe since the 2000s. So Donald Trump has been in the media scene for decades, and he's very well known, and that's one reason of his popularity. But he has been in politics for less than 10 years, and that's quite late compared to populism we have in Europe.
But as you say, he was a household figure, the host of a TV reality show, a former tabloid favorite when he was a construction magnate. While Trump was cleaning up in Iowa Monday, the final season of Succession was dominating the drama category at television's Emmy Awards in Los Angeles. The show seems inspired by the real-life intrigue surrounding 92-year-old media mogul Rupert Murdoch. The jewels in his crown include Fox News, which last week hosted a town hall-style meeting with Trump in Iowa that aired exactly at the same moment as his rivals for the Republican nomination were debating over on CNN. Ian Reifovitz, here's a kind of a chicken and egg question for you. Is it the messaging to drive the ratings that Donald Trump is so popular, or is it something more deep-rooted? Why is it that he's so popular?
Well, I mean, the answer is yes to both. But I'm also not willing to just sort of go down the line and say he's so popular. What do we know so far? And I want to follow up on something that one of my colleagues said earlier. He won half the vote in Iowa. Not half the vote in the country, half the vote among Republicans in Iowa, okay? That means half the Republican voters voted for somebody else. We have to think of him as a quasi-incumbent. No, he's not the president right now, but he, A, was the president of the United States, and B, he is the incumbent Republican nominee. We have to think of it that way. So, for example, if Joe Biden got 50% of the vote in an upcoming primary, and his opponents got combined got about 50%, we would say that made him look incredibly weak. And I'm not saying it's exactly the same thing, but when we say that 51% is the record for a Republican caucus, well, no, it's not. If you compare it to the uncontested caucuses that George W. Bush, for example, had in 2004, or that Reagan had in 1984, if they were the only candidate there, they got 100%, right? This is an incumbent. An incumbent who can only get 51% of the vote in a caucus doesn't look so great in that sense. So I want us to emphasize that.
That's the glass. Hang on. That's the glass half full. The glass half empty is that if you're a believer in the U.S. Constitution, you're wondering how come after the January 6th storming of the Capitol, he got so many votes?
Because he's running in a Republican primary. The Republican electorate, and I think somebody mentioned this earlier, really has changed. It has become radicalized. He helped radicalize them. They get their news within an enclosed media environment, a closed-loop media environment, not that different from what citizens of the Soviet Union got when they got their state media, except here Republicans are choosing to be within a state media environment. So from their perspective, January 6th was Donald Trump speaking out against a stolen election, not trying to steal an election. It was not an uprising, a violent uprising of Trump supporters. It was an inside job by Black Lives Matter and the FBI somehow working hand in hand. This is what large numbers of Republican voters believe. The exit polling last night from Iowa said that about 2/3 of the people who voted last night believe that Biden is not the legitimate president. Well, I mean, think about it this way. Donald Trump didn't even win all of their votes. That's 66%. He only got 51%. It's a very, very different sense of what is a fact and what is the truth among the Republican electorate. So if that's the case, it's not surprising that he's going to win 51% of those voters. Not to me, at least.
And what's in it for Fox News?
Money. Money. They would drop Trump as they reduced their coverage of Trump in 2020, 2023. They didn't have him on for interviews, I believe, in 2022 or 23, when it looked like maybe he was a little bit weaker, that you didn't see that much of Trump on Fox. Now that he's more popular within the Republican base, he's back again. He gets that town hall, like you said. Fox is a company. It's a for-profit company that exists to make money. It serves an audience, and that audience provides it with eyeballs for advertisers, and that's how they make their profits.
But again, I'll turn to Adisa Shed on this. There's a message that resonates, and what we've seen in the last few years among Trump's supporters is this feeling of being hard done by. A lot of them have suffered in a lot of these areas, feel as though they're left out from those that are making all the money in the economic post-COVID boom.
Right, and there's a bigger issue at stake. The anti-system rhetoric is powerful because traditional elites have had difficulties to represent the voters and are got more and more disconnected from their base. So if you think of Hillary Clinton, for instance, she was not really popular and really close to the people in the way Obama was, for instance. So there is disconnection between elites and the people, and that makes room for leaders who claim to be anti-system, to be in favor of the people, on the side of the people, when traditional elites decepted their voters.
And what we saw in that report was sort of sometimes a white nationalist bent. Why?
Well, there is resentment around mass unemployment, desindustrialization, people going unemployed for a very long period of time that feeds the opioid crisis, for instance. So there is a sort of despair in a certain category of population that does not feel represented anymore.
Ketevan Gorjestani?
I think that is part of the story, but there is also, if you look at how he evolved among different key groups in the Republican Party from 2016 to now, he has, for example, really expanded among white college-educated voters, not just the non-college educated voters. So this framing of the hard done by blue collar voter that feels left out is one part of the story. But there are also a lot of very well off or simply middle class people who are doing fine, who are voting for Trump. And those people are voting either because they have a lot of money and they think that financially it's better for them to have a Republican, or there is this group of Republican voters who I believe, and from what I've seen on the ground in the United States, these are not people who don't have a job. These are not people who are struggling day to day, if you will. They're not super rich, but they're fine, if you will. And they feel like they're losing their place as white people in the United States. And so that is also part of the story. And I think after 2016, a lot of the media, we were trying to understand how we failed to see this. And the automatic thing was, these are people who feel left out by globalization, and he's talking to these people. But there were a lot of people who voted for him. The Republican elite, for example, they are not hard done by, and they're still following this. And some part of the Republican Party is very keen on this language that we've seen on immigration, this nativist, this white nationalist sort of movement. And that should not be forgotten when you talk about why Donald Trump is doing so well among very different types of groups of voters within the Republican Party. The evangelicals, the non-evangelicals, the college-educated, the non-college educated, all of that makes Donald Trump. That's not to say that there are not people who don't want Donald Trump. And I'll give one number. There was a poll recently that showed that about 47% of Nikki Haley voters are considering not staying at home if it's Donald Trump. They're considering voting for Joe Biden. That means that there is a key group of Republicans who dislike Donald Trump so much that they're willing to vote for a Democratic president again.
Yeah, that feeling of being replaced. We were talking about Italy earlier. We've seen in Germany a rise of the far right. These are countries where the population is aging fast and you have to bring in immigrants.
Exactly. And there is a sort of a antagonism between those two things because you're seeing the Republicans really focused on immigration. It's one of their top priorities, and they feel that they can use that as one of the key tools for this election. And that's why they're debating with Joe Biden over that immigration bill, because they know that this is something that resonates with a lot of people, with a lot of Republicans specifically, because there is, at the same time, on the left in the Democratic Party, a tendency to go a little bit towards the progressives. And you're hearing these progressives being very vocal, and they talk about immigration. They talk about when the United States is going to become a majority-minority country. So all of these things are things that the Republicans are using to motivate those people who feel that they are possibly going to be replaced. And it's a word that has a lot within it, and it's a very difficult issue in the United States, but I think that they are tapping on that a little bit.
All right, the middle class in the United States is not going to be replaced anytime soon, but it is getting squeezed. The Pew Research Center did a big survey in 2022 that showed that over the past 50 years, the rich have gotten sizably richer. The poor, this is a term, this is a amount of aggregate income held by which categories. The poor have gotten a little bit poorer over 50 years. They now hold only 8% of the country's income, as opposed to 10 a half century ago. And yeah, the middle income parts have gone down. It was interesting to hear Agnès Trier, France's new prime minister. Again, we're having the same conversations on both sides of the Atlantic, talking about the middle class. And that's, when you see in those numbers, there is a problem with not unemployment in the United States officially, since we've got very low unemployment rates, but people feeling squeezed, that their spending power is going down.
Yes, and this is going to be a very important factor in the decision in November. Biden is being criticized for mostly the economic part, although he's been doing a great job considering the situation. But this is really where Trump is attacking him on the economy, and inflation is hitting people hard. And this is going to be really important in the election. And so even if, and I'm rebounding on what my neighbor presented on the white segment of the voters, one of the targets for Trump is to gather more black voters. And
Latinos. He's gotten more.
He's got more and more Latinos. So it's interesting because this immigration Latino is going to be more numerous by 2050 than the whites, okay? So you could say demographic is going to help the Democrats, but this is not sure at all, because they are a conservative constituency. As far as black voters go, economically speaking, you had a recent poll by a ratio of 6-to-1. Black voters still think that they were fared better under Biden economically, but still they think that Biden did not deliver enough proportionately to his promises. They feel, okay, why should we keep loyal to the Democratic Party? Because maybe Trump is going to do a better job. At least he's saying it like it is. And maybe if we bring our agenda to him, it's going to help us more. So there is this middle class aspect. There is this white versus black. They want to target 25% of the black voters. I don't know if they're going to be able to reach that. But yeah, you have this several layers that intermix and will bring it.
And neither side taking anything for granted. Again, the whole world is watching while Donald Trump savors his victory in Iowa. Volodymyr Zelensky this Tuesday pounding the flesh in Davos at the World Economic Forum. Ukraine's president calling for tighter sanctions against Russia, more support in what looks like a race against time. And while Trump hasn't formally said he would cut support for Kyiv if he's reelected, he does regularly brag that he gets along great with Vladimir Putin, and that if, quote, if I'd been in power, Russia would have never invaded. Kenevan Gorjestani, are we overplaying the chance that the U.S. could cut the purse strings to NATO, could leave Ukraine out to dry?
I don't think we're underplaying it. I'm not certain that it would happen, but he already threatened while he was president to leave NATO. I mean, he was very close by all accounts of the people who were in that room when it happened. He was pretty close to just throwing the towel and leaving NATO. So I think that it's something that could be possible. The question of Ukraine, you're seeing Republicans in Congress, and not necessarily Republicans who are the all super Trumpy Republicans, that are questioning helping Ukraine and continuing to help Ukraine. So I don't think that it's out of the ordinary to think that Donald Trump at least would not be putting any pressure on those Republicans to pass more aid to Ukraine, which is something that Biden is doing, and he's been trying, and it's not working yet. So if you have a president who sort of says, well, if you pass it, great. If you don't, I don't really care, is probably what could happen. And I think that it's very important to see the difference between the two when it comes to foreign policy. And I think Ukraine is a clear example of where Donald Trump would just throw his hands up and say, this is not our problem. I'm going to deal with what is happening in the United States. He also said that he would sort of sit them down, Zelensky and Putin, and that it would be done, but it would be done pretty much in favor of Vladimir Putin and of Russia. So it would have very important consequences. Exactly what that would entail, we don't know, but it's clear that for the Ukrainians, it's better to have Joe Biden stay in office than to have Donald Trump.
Since COVID, Ian Rifovitz, we were talking about it when we were discussing Taiwan in this studio 24 hours ago. The U.S.'s share of the world economy has grown, while that of China's has gone down. Does Donald Trump really want the United States to retreat from its role as, the Pax Americana, the world's top superpower?
Well, Donald Trump is a classic isolationist. America First is a term that goes back to Charles Lindbergh and the Nazi-sympathizing far right in the late 1930s. He wants to, be an economic and political nationalist as well as white nationalist, but in the sense that he wants nothing to do with the rest of the world. I think he came out recently that Trump told Ursula von der Leyen that he wouldn't come to the aid of Europe if it was attacked, which is essentially, a complete rejection of NATO. He is a selfish person, I guess you want to look at it that way, and I think he views the entire world through his own sort of narrow lens. And so since he's only for himself and doesn't feel like helping anybody else does anything for him, that's how he looks at the United States' role in
the world. But are his voters, and more generally, is the American public as isolationist as he is?
The American public as a whole is not as isolationist as Trump is. They're just not. The question is, are there enough voters willing to go along with him, or who don't even pay attention to foreign affairs and will elect him and allow him to carry out those proclivities? But he's not going to have the people in his cabinet like John Kelly, who was there last time as chief of staff, holding him back from doing things like pulling out of NATO. So it's an emotionally easy thing to be for. I'm for us, America, not for them. And Donald Trump, if nothing else, is very simplistic in his approach to any policy, and there is an appeal to some people when you're given that kind of simplistic policy approach.
All right. So right now, and we mentioned it at the outset, if New Hampshire goes the way that Ketevan Gorgestani predicts it might, it'd be before the beginning of February. We'll already be looking ahead to the general election in November. And that's where Donald Trump has to be measured, not according to his own popularity, but against that of his rival, trying to shake off the perception that at 81, Joe Biden is too old to run for re-election. The incumbent putting a spring in his step as he visited a food bank in Philadelphia on Monday. An ABC News poll found Sunday that voters find Biden trustworthy, Ketevan Gorgestani, but
they don't think he's the best candidate for them. They think he's too old. They think he's not exciting. That is all very true, but we're in January. Most Americans are not yet really tuned in really to the nitty-gritty of the election. And as Joe Biden has said multiple times, he loves saying that phrase, do not compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. And I think you're going to see the Biden campaign start to pivot more and more their campaign on making that comparison. It's me or it's Donald Trump. And I think that a lot of Democrats, some independents who are currently maybe saying, he's too old, I wish there was somebody else, he should have stepped down, all of this is all well. You have the Muslims, Democrats who are saying that because of his policy in the Middle East, we're not going to vote for Joe Biden. In November, when you're a Democrat and the choice is to potentially have 4 more years of Donald Trump, I think there are some people who are willing to put aside all their criticism of Joe Biden and say it's still better than having Donald Trump.
Elisa Schell?
Well, in this election, most Americans don't want either Trump or Biden. All polls showed that. So they will have to choose between the lesser of the two evils, but they are not the first choice for either side. So it's really a choice by default. And Biden was expected to serve only 1 term, and he's running for a second one because Kamala Harris is not ready to run for herself. And we can just hope.
Or because he felt like running again.
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that because he really put forward Kamala Harris, and she was not able to gain enough political credits to run for herself. So I'm not sure he wants to run again, but he is the best chance for the Democratic Party to win this election.
Agnès Troyer?
Yes, to come back on what your prognostic earlier that never Trumpers will vote for Democrats in case.
No, I said some polls show that a certain part of those never Trumpers are willing to consider, which is already pretty big, but
and so,
they have to do it. Of course.
I think that, by the same token, Democrats, when they have to choose between Biden and Trump, if they are the nominees, I would think that, Republicans would vote for Trump majoritarily, even if they don't support him.
I think I think it's going to be complicated, but I think for both sides, the question is going to be turnout.
Absolutely.
How many of their voters can they turn out? If there is a high turnout, that's where you're going to see the difference.
And this is where it's so complicated because it's not about winning the popular vote. The Electoral College system means Donald Trump doesn't need to win that. He lost by 5 million votes last time, rather than right number of states. Now, this map is interesting because sociologists go beyond looking at swing states now. They look at swing counties. Mm-hmm. There are a few counties, a mere 200 or so of them, that can determine the next presidential race. If you see on this map, anywhere that's light colored, sorry, the map's a bit small, anywhere that's light colored, very light blue or very light red, those are the swing counties. And you can see there's just very few of them. Some of the dark blue areas are very highly populated urban areas. So at the end of the day, Ian Reifovitz, U.S. elections are always doomed to be very, very close these days.
Well, yeah, the Electoral College system is what it is. I'll leave it at that. Got Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Those are probably the 3 that are most likely to be states. But then there's also Arizona, Georgia, and look. You can get 1 vote to flip Georgia, whether it's in a rural county or it's in a suburban county or it's in a light blue or a dark red county. It's still 1 vote. But unfortunately, we have a system where the one who gets the most votes doesn't win necessarily. We've seen it since in 2000. We saw it in 2016. Donald Trump has gotten fewer votes in every election he's run in. Right? He lost to Hillary Clinton by 3 million votes. He just got some votes in the right place. He lost to Joe Biden by, I want to say, about 7 million votes. In 2018, he was leading the Republican Party. They got swamped as Democrats took both. In 2022, Democrats did historically well for 2 years into a new presidential term. Donald Trump is not exactly a great candidate on the ballot in November for his party. So, we don't want to overstate his amazing strengths. He has been the strongest Republican since 2016, yes. But even now, even in these polls, he's running about neck and neck with Joe Biden in the popular vote. I do think the economy is going to continue to turn. Inflation has been going down, even more so in the last 6 months than it has been in the previous 12 months. That's going to redound to Joe Biden's benefit. The Fed is going to start cutting interest rates now that we've seemed to have avoided an inflationary spiral. We're going to have a soft landing. If those trends continue, Joe Biden will have economic headwinds at his back. He's going to be not Donald Trump. He can say, you can trust me. You can't trust the other guy. Look what he's done in the past. I think that's probably going to be enough if the economy holds for Joe Biden to come back to 51, 52% of the popular vote and carry in the Electoral College. So if you want a prediction, that's it.
All right, Ian Reifovitz, we'll be turning back to you in your crystal ball as the next months unfold. Many thanks for joining us from New York City. I want to thank as well Agnès Trouillet, Elisa Schell, Ketevan Gordestani. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.